Hi, I'm Steve Green. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a basic plugin using the CRM 2011 Developer Toolkit for Visual Studio. So I've got my Visual Studio 2012 open. Before you do that, you need to ensure that from the extracted SDK within the Tools folder, there's a Developer Toolkit folder, and within there there's a MSI installer for Visual Studio 2012, which is the one with the 12 in the title, and then one for Visual Studio 2010. If you're still using Visual Studio 2010, you need to install those to have access to the template. So I've already got that installed. So if I click New Project, then on the left hand side under my templates area I can see a dynamic CRM. I typically use for a new solution for a new client is a new Visual Studio solution template, which creates a solution that contains a project for each of the customization types. So you get a project for plugins, workflows, etc. So I'll call that CRM demo. Okay, then it will ask me to connect to the server and organization that I'll going to do this solution for. In this instance it's online development server, on-premise, sorry. So it's just the NetBIOS host name for our server. It's on the default port 80, so I can just it's not secured. Obviously if you've had it on a specific port number like 5555, you'd have to specify that there if it was HTTP. So if I click connect, it'll prompt me for credentials. If you were part of the domain, your PC was joined to the domain, you were a deployment administrator, you wouldn't need to do this next step. You could tick default credentials, but I need to enter my domain credentials, and then what that will do, it will interrogate the discovery server for organizations that I'm a member of. So, and in this instance I want to use the CRM demo organization. It will then interrogate that particular organization for solutions within it. So obviously when you target a specific solution with your customizations, they'll appear within that in CRM. So I've set up an empty solution called CRM demo solution, and then that should create the package. It'll prompt you if you wish to create a website for testing of the Silverlight component. I'm not going to be producing any Silverlight within this, so I'm not really interested in creating the website, so I'll just untick that and OK. And it will continue to add all the projects to the solution. Okay, so that's now the Silverlight component, which I can close. I'm not interested in that. Okay, so now we've got the empty solution, which contains 3 projects, which are, so you've got the package itself, the plugins project, a Silverlight project, and a workflow project. It's important to note that before you can deploy this solution, you need to strongly sign both the workflow assembly and the plugins assembly. So if I right click on plugins, properties, obviously in the various tabs to define this project, if I click on the signing tab, I need to tick sign the assembly, create a new key file, which you can call whatever you like. In this instance, call it the company name, Feel and Soft. Don't need to password protect it. That's created a key file for the plugins. I need to do the same for the workflow assembly. So again, create a new key file. Don't need to password protect. It can have the same name because it's part of a separate project. So now under the workflow project I can see that key file. So I can close both of those tabs. So we're going to be creating a new plugin. So if I right click on the plugins project, add new item, it's simply a class library which I can give a name to. So in this instance you want to give it something descriptive to yourself, so I'll say something like create task post account. So it's going to be quite a simple plugin that will create a task after an account has been created. So if I add that, so this is now an empty shell of a class library. There's nothing specific to CRM at this point. The Developer Toolkit will have referenced the relevant DLLs automatically, but obviously you'll need to add the correct using statements to have the IntelliSense for those libraries. So I'll just start by putting Microsoft.xrm.sdk in. Now, important to note, you have to make the class, the access modifier, public, and you must implement the iPlugin interface. And then the only thing you need to implement from the iPlugin interface, if we right click it and implement interface, it creates this shell of a execute method with a service provider parameter, from which you can extract the context, and obviously from that you can get access to the input parameters and so on, which contain things like the target entity that was calling which caused the plugin to trigger, and also use it to instantiate the organization service. So we can start by deleting this exception that gets thrown. I tend to work to a sort of similar structure with each of my plugins, and on the clipboard I've got the sort of standard shell. So if I run through this quickly, so what I've got is I've instantiated the context from the service provider. Obviously I've got an area where if I want to utilize the tracing service for diagnostic outputs, so I can put outputs either side of a particular method, and obviously if it fails on that method and throws an exception, if I'm doing diagnostics tracing, I can see at what point it reached. So that can be quite useful if you're trying to pinpoint an issue, especially if it's online and you can't attach to the process and step through the code. Then I create an empty entity reference type, which is just set to null. I also do some checks on if the context contains an input parameter of type target, and that is an entity type. And if it is, I extract it and cast it to that empty entity reference. I can also do checks on the message type or the target entity name. So if you wanted to make sure it was only registered against the account entity, for instance, you could put an extra if condition in here. So you've got primary entity name, and it will be the logical name, so all lowercase. So I could say, sorry, if it's not equal to account, again return from the plugin, and it will just gracefully end without doing a great deal. And if none of these conditions are obviously true for if it doesn't contain target and it's not a type entity, then it will end anyway. Then within the try block, I'm instantiating the organization service, which we can use for accessing data and metadata for the platform. Then I've got a couple of catch blocks. I need to add system.serviceModel as a using to make that SOAP fault exception available. And let me just uncomment this tracing line because I've referenced it in the catch blocks. So to begin now to create the plugin, obviously this will be triggered on the create of an account. What we need to do is within this register file, at the moment it contains the two assemblies it's going to register with CRM. Obviously they've got empty GUIDs at the moment because they haven't been registered with the platform, but when they are, these will populate. You can also specify whether you wish it to be sandboxed or not. The default for plugins is sandboxed, and for custom workflow assemblies isn't. Obviously, if it's an online deployment, you'll have to deploy to sandbox because you have no other choice. But for on-premise, which this is, I could choose sandbox or none for the isolation mode. So if I deploy that now, this may take a few minutes, so I'll just put it on pause. Okay, so that's now deployed, and obviously because I had the register file open, it's prompted me that it's been modified outside of the editor. So do I want to reload it? So I say yes, and now you can see it's populated the GUIDs. And if I were to look at the solution itself under the plugin assemblies, I should see my 2 assemblies, obviously with the relevant isolation mode. Okay, so what I need to do now is to actually register the my create task post account assembly as a plugin. So within this solution assembly plugins, if I remove that final slash, do a new line, obviously do the closing part of the node, create a new line in between. I've copied and pasted what needs to go to do the basic registration of that assembly. So is a plugin types node with a closing element, a plugin node, and then empty steps at the moment. Within the plugin attributes, you need to give it a basic description, a friendly name, the name of the assembly, so that includes the parent assembly for the namespace, a blank GUID, so it's 8444 12 zeros, and then again type name, which is a repeat of what you saw as the name. I think that's the critical part that has to match the namespace and the assembly name. So now if I right click and deploy again, this may take a few minutes again, so I'll just put it on pause. Okay, so that's deployed. It's now again prompted me because I had that visible to reload it. And now if I scroll to the right, I can see it's registered my assembly as part of that parent, or my class, sorry, as part of that assembly, and it's got a GUID. And again, if I go back to the solution and click on plugins, I can now see my create task class library within CRM. So now we need to create a step, so I can close that registration file on the CRM Explorer, which can either be found, I think, with tools. No, not sure. It's docked on my Visual Studio on the left hand side. If I expand out my organization and plugin assemblies, I can see my 2 plugins that are part of my solution with the little green coloring. If I expand plugins, I can see my friendly named create task plugin. If I expand again, there are no steps, so I need to right click it now and select add step. And obviously we said we would do this against the account entity, so if I click account, it then retrieves the available message types. So in this instance we're going to do it on a create. I will run it in the context of the initiating user, and then we've got the pipeline stage, which is obviously quite important depending on the logic of the business logic, whether you're manipulating values within the current record where you may wish to prefer to use pre-operation so that you don't have to do subsequent updates and cause sort of infinite loops where your same plugin triggers and you have to trap for it. So because this is what we want this to happen after the account's been created, we'll do it post-operation, and it will execute synchronous. And we don't need a pre or post image because we're not going to be looking for changes in variables, etc. before or after. So OK that. So now you can see the additional step has been created, and if I also look within the register file, it's automatically put this extra XML in, which tells it the name of the step with a description of GUID and all the properties we defined. So I can now deploy again. pause. Okay, that's successfully deployed. So again, if I look at my solution, the SDK message processing steps should now have the post account create step that we created. Post operation against the account entity. So now we need to obviously write the business logic within our try block. What I'll also do with this solution is I've previously on one of my other videos showed you how to create an early bound type. So I'll add that existing class library. So if I right click the solution, properties, add existing item, I created that into the bin folder of the SDK, but you can specify in the output path where you wish that to be created. So in my bin I've got this CRM demo early bound class library. So I've added that to my plugin solution. Because the namespace referenced within it matches my namespace of my solution, I can now reference the types in a strongly typed form. So instead of having to use the entity class, for instance, now I can use the so for instance task would actually exist as a type. So I can say task, new task, and then I have available all of its fields as properties. So if I click a dot, or type a dot rather, in here all the properties for that entity are available strongly typed. So if I wanted to set the subject test task, something along those lines, it's available. Oh, I forgot the equals. So it's available strongly typed, and compile time it would obviously be checked. And obviously you've got the data types. You haven't got to cast it and know exactly what type it can contain. So what I first need to do before I create that task is I will cast the entity early bound type that I've extracted from the input parameters to an early bound type of an account. So calling account, and I can take the entity that I've populated here, and there's a toEntity method that's a generic method. I can tell it what type I wish to convert this entity late bound type to. So now, because this is post event, this account will have a GUID because it's been created in the main database operation. So when I'm defining my task, I can specify task. Let's say the scheduled start to be now. We could possibly put a description. I'll say all these are available as early bound properties. And what we could do is concatenate the account name or something into the task subject, so that early bound type, now we've got the calling account, we've got access to all of its properties as well. So, and these are all the schema names, as you can see there, capitalized where relevant, as opposed to when it's late bound, it's all logical names and they're all lowercase. So we've now got a test task plus the account calling, the account name. Ooh, I've done that as a method when it's a property. So that's a very basic task which we can now associate to the account. So set regarding, so also new task regarding object ID, which will expect an entity reference, which we can say take the calling account early bound type and use the toEntity reference method. And then when we call the organization service create method, we can pass it the new task. And that's a very simple plugin. What I'll do is I'll register that now again. So just save that, just build it, ensure it builds successfully, which it does. So I can right click and deploy again. I'll just pop that on pause. That's successfully deployed. So now if we go back to CRM and go to our accounts entity, so if I create a new account, call it CRM demo account, when I save this, obviously it's a create, it's a new account, it will call our plugin that we've registered, which should then generate a task with the title test task with the account name within it. Obviously there's a bit of a delay the first time you run a plugin, particularly on premise. I don't know if it's the same online, as it has to load the assembly for the first time and cache it. So now associated with this account I should have test task with our concatenated account name. It's regarding this account, and obviously it's took I don't know if we can see the scheduled start, but it's basically made the scheduled start and the due date the same. I mean, if I quickly customize the form and put the scheduled start upon, it's a little bit slow. So I can now drag the scheduled start date onto the form. I'll remove that spacer, put it in a bit of a logical order. So start and due date, save it, publish, wait a few seconds whilst that publishes, close that, refresh that form, F5. Oh, I may have to reload it. So now we can see the start date that I also defined as the point when the plugin was run. So that completes the a very basic plugin. Thanks for listening.